Hello everyone. Today I'm going to present one of the ongoing project of the Virthulab, and this was also my master's degree thesis, but we are still working on this project. The main theme of the project was gaming motivation, and our main aim was to create a scale to measure gaming motivation. Obviously, to do so, we must firstly know what is gaming motivation. Let's say that there is not a known definition of gaming motivation, but Bilio and colleagues defined gaming motivation as behavior-specific factors that drive people to start and continue with the gaming activity. This means that basically there are some needs that people can satisfy through the gaming activity, and we must understand, or we want to know, what those motivations are. So we started by doing basically a literature overview to understand the theories behind gaming motivation. And we identified the two main theories. The first one is the self-determination theory, developed by Deci and Ryan. This theory is focused on three main components. According to them, we take action in order to satisfy three psychological human needs: competence, relatedness, we want to feel connected to others, and autonomy, we want to be free to do our things in our own way. And this theory is also strictly related to the definition of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. As we may know, we sometimes may act because of personal values or principle, and in this case, we are not searching for a reward. Instead, if we are talking about extrinsic motivation, we are strictly doing that because we want to receive a reward, or maybe a sort of, let's say, to get something back from our action. Even a status can be something that we can achieve, and it is external from us. The second most used theory is the uses and gratification theory, which is mostly used in marketing, and in this case, media and technologies can be used to satisfy to some needs. In this case, technology is seen as a mean or even an extension of ourselves, and it is mostly seen as something that can satisfy some of our needs, let's say entertainment, maybe boredom, or even competition. So the very first study that was carried out to assess gaming motivation, was carried out by Bartle. It was a taxonomy. This means that it was not empirically supported, and his main aim was to identify players that attend multiplayer dungeons. Let's say that his first aim was simply to give some advice to developers of multiplayer dungeons to improve the setting, but he did not do any statistical, let's say, correlation or even operation to support his taxonomy. In fact, the very two first studies that were carried out about gaming motivation were both in 2006. The first one made by Yi, who created the very first scale mostly related to multiplayer games. And the second one was the player need, the player experience of need satisfaction PENS, created by Ryan and colleagues. Both of these scales try to assess different motivations, but the main thing in common is the fact that both of them are trying to see if there is some need that are satisfied through the gaming activity. And only in 2012, based on the same theory as the PENS, which is the self-determination theory, GAMS was created, which is also one of the most used scale right now in literature. The main difference about PENS and GAMS is the fact that GAMS is based more on the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation aspect of the self-determination theory, while the PENS is based more on the three needs that are satisfied through the gaming activity. The only difference with Yi is the fact that Yi based his research on a model that he thought about. So in literature, we can see that there is not much known about gaming motivation, if not some general consideration that we can think about in general. The thing is that even though they are general, they are supported by data. So we know that male players tend to score higher on whole motivation, and the younger people tend to have generally stronger gaming motivation if compared to older players. Generally, we tend to play for competition, for escapism, for social reasons. And the most interesting one is the fact that addicted and non-addicted players tend to play for the same reasons. So this means that the intensity of the playing action is probably moderated by another variable, but the reasons for playing are exactly the same. Also, there are some gender differences. Males tend to play mainly for competition and escapism, while females tend to play to stay in contact with the meaningful ones and for escapism reasons. There are not much studies about the correlations between personalities and gaming motivation. So the first aim was to verify the psychometric properties of the scale that we built. The second one was to verify the dimensionality of the scale. So we did an EFA, and after that we carried out our confirmatory factor analysis, and also to assess the internal and external validity of the scale. And the bigger aim, obviously, of this research was to create a gaming motivation questionnaire that was not dependent on the genre of the game. Because as we may know, in literature, many times we have ad hoc scales, lots of them, but they are related to specific genre of games or even for specific titles. For example, some scales are strictly dedicated to, let's say, World of Warcraft, for example. So they are tailored to measure motivation simply for World of Warcraft players. 44 scales were identified through the literature review. We take all the items from these scales, we analyze them based on the content, we clusterize them under common groups according to the content of the item, then we reduce them through some focus groups, and the final version of the scale is composed of 99 items and 18 dimensions. Here we can see all the dimensions. I think that the names are pretty self-explanatory. Maybe some of them need some definition, but for example, arousal is simply the excitement that we can feel by playing. Completionism is referring to the need of the player to do every second mission, that it is not necessary to complete the story of the game, let's say, or they could be considered trophies, let's say just some additional trophies. Diversion refers to playing to not do what we should do. For example, I should be studying, I should be working, but instead I'm playing video games. I think that the order, for example, autonomy, boredom, challenge, competition, coping, entertainment, escapism, fantasy, immersion, habit, nostalgia, relax, self-esteem, and social can be understood by the name only. Lastly, the only one that maybe needs an explanation is mastery. In this case, we are referring to people who play just to master a skill of a game. As we may know, games have different type of gameplays, different actions, let's say, and some people may want to be the best at that game or on certain aspects of that games. So we carried out 2 studies. The first one for the EFA, so the exploratory factor analysis. The participants in total were 543. 72% were males aged between 14 and 68. While in the second study for the confirmatory factor analysis, we aimed to have more participants. So 2098 were the total, with almost 60% male aged between 15 and 70. We also received a huge number of titles cited by the participants because we asked them, as you can see in the second section, these 1, 2, and 3 are the section of the survey. And in the second section, we also asked them their favorite title and the titles that they played the most in the last month. And obviously, we received a huge numbers of titles. This means that we took into consideration even games that are not really popular or that might be a part of a niche, let's say. So in the first part, we asked for social demographic, age, gender, status, example, education qualification. The second part is more focused on gaming behaviors, for example, the hours spent playing and the preferences of title, as I've said before. While for the first study, we simply submitted the psychological gaming motivation questionnaire. While for the second study, we also put the MojiQ, which is another scale developed by Demetrovics and colleagues for measuring gaming motivation, the GAMS that I have mentioned before, and the need for cognition and the need to belong to assess external and internal validity of the scale. So here we can see the results of the EFA and the CFA compared in 2 columns. And initially, the EFA confirmed a 16 model factor. So most of the factors or dimensions, if you prefer this term, of the scales were maintained. 2 completely dimensions were born because the items loaded on a completely new factors. especially copying, some items of copying loaded on a new factor called aggressivity. This means that there are some people that tend to play because they feel the need to satisfy these, let's say, this need that they have to be aggressive against others, and it appears to be a standalone motivation, not assimilable to copying. Freedom also was born out of creativity, autonomy, and it is basically the need of some players to feel that they can do what they want with the commands or gameplay options that they have. To them, because the items were pretty much similar: immersion and fantasy, challenge and mastery, where in challenge we are seeking for cognitive, let's say some cognitive challenge, while in mastery, as I said, we wanted to master a skill, and apparently they are similar. Two were removed because they did not provide any significant result: arousal and relax. The most interesting part about our scale was the fact that we wanted to include self-esteem and nostalgia. All the dimensions included in our scale were based on literature, so we did not put new dimensions, but instead decided at first to include some dimensions that were really new and not explored as much as the others. In the end, 20 items were dropped and 79 items were left, and with this new scale, we decided to move on to the CFA, which resulted in 12 dimensions and 45 items. Overall, the reliability of the scale ranged from 0.77 to 0.194, which is quite good, and the model showed an adequate fit, with 34 items removed, and lastly, 3 dimensions were also removed if compared to before: freedom, completionism, and nostalgia. Specifically for completionism and nostalgia, we decided to remove them simply because they were a little bit too specific. We have to remember that our main aim was to measure gaming motivation not based on genre, and sometimes completionism and nostalgia might be related to some specific game or some specific players, while freedom was more related to the fact that the items did not give, let's say, good results in the analysis. As for internal and external validity, we saw that there were good correlations, statistical significant correlations, pretty high, among the motivations that were similar, actually the same motivations from other scales, while we obtain low correlations with similar but yet different constructs, which is the main of the external validation. So the results also confirm the literature. We saw, in fact, that indeed younger and less educated people have stronger gaming motivation, that generally people tend to play for social reasons, for self-esteem also, and for habit, that boys tend to, in fact, play for competitive reasons, while girls for escapism, and that in general, girls tend to prefer simulation or mobile games, while boys tend to prefer competitive games as PvE and PvP. The most interesting result that we obtain is the fact that we decided to compile a list. We tried to categorize the games for genre, and we saw that the needs that are satisfied are different based on the type of game. So PvP players tend to satisfy their need of competition, their need to be connected to others, or they feel that when they play a PvP games and they're good at that, they feel a boost in their self-esteem, which improves. While instead, PvE players tend to play because they feel the need to, let's say, try to cope with their feelings and because they want to be immersed in a different type of world. Multiplayer games are mostly played for competition, for self-esteem, and for social. Simulators for creativity, while interactive games, which refers to games where usually you simply touch the screen, or for example, you have some option, the gameplay is really limited to this type of choices, are mostly played because of nostalgia. I have to clarify that some of these results obviously are more connected to the EFA than the CFA, but they were at least interesting in the first part. Maybe we should try to deepen this type of topic, but for now, some of these results are more related to that part than the CFA. In general, the CFA confirmed the literature findings. Most interestingly, Peggy had no significant correlation with aggressivity as we saw during the EFA. So this means that even though there are some people playing games that are aggressive, this does not mean that those persons are going to become aggressive also in real life, as sometimes it happens that it is often said on TV or, for example, on the internet, we believe that people playing games with a high PEGI, that usually have that high PEGI because they have some sexual violence scene or gameplay, might lead people to be more violent, which is not the case. They are not related. So a person could be violent and could be playing a perfectly normal game like Animal Crossing, let's say. So the potential impact of this research, there are many, let's say that there are many reasons that this research could be useful to other researchers. In fact, that we could make cross-cultural comparison, for example, and this is the first scale that is not dependent on the genre of game. This means that it's not going to be affected by the passage of time, because games are changing rapidly and they are evolving really at the speed of light. But this scale does not take into consideration little differences, so it's going to be less affected by it. It could be helpful in some gamification aspects for the companies if they want, for example, to develop something for their employees for formation and so on. Games are often used for formation. In research, it could be mostly used to compare addicted and non-addicted players on non-psychopathological reason. Now, this should be developed a little bit more, but let's say that we could make some two groups and use this scale in a mean to compare them. And also, it could be used in the learning field to always create some profiles, for example, of my students or of other type of people that I'm teaching or that I'm working with in the learning field. So in this way, the future perspective should be that this scale could be used to create some profiles. Maybe if we are able to correlate the results of these scales to also a personality scale, we could be able to create some tailorized profiles that are solely based on that person. So to create also a tailorized intervention, training, formation, and so on, we could basically have a really detailed some really detailed information about that person or even group of people. The scale is currently being translated in Japanese and Korean and being validated into those two languages, and soon probably it will be also validated in English and, if possible, in other languages as well. This scale could be also used to compare younger and older people, with older people meaning even really old people. We know that older people are now using smartphones a lot nowadays to play different types of games, but gamification aspects are also used, for example, in the treatment of MCI patients, mild cognitive impairment patients, because we know that games may help them with the cognitive aspect and in slowing down this effect of, let's say, cognitive deficits that are affecting them. Also, we have to take into consideration the limitation of this study because obviously, as many research, it has some limitation. The study was cross-sectional. Most of the sample came online. We searched for it online. So this means that some players may not be included for many reasons. The number of male participants was higher than females, even though in the second study it was better. We still had more males than female players. It is a self-report scale, so it could be affected by social desirability, depends on many contexts, situation, and so on, but we have to take into consideration that this is a typical bias of many self-report scale. And that entire group of players were particularly small, probably because they are hard to reach. And as I mentioned it before, some players in general, maybe older people, are hard to reach. It's hard to ask them to do the questionnaire and so on. So they have sort of not being excluded, but they were not a big proportion of our sample. So we really hope that this scale could be useful in the future, and we are, let's say that we are trying to use it as much as possible, even in other projects as well. We are trying also to use these scales with children with neurocognitive problems because they may have neurodevelopmental disorders. And we know that often trainings with games are used with children because they lack motivation to keep going with normal trainings. So this, let's say that this project has many potential, and it is a currently ongoing project of the lab in which we have many we have lots of hope about it. Thank you very much for listening.